For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a bizarre hypothetical scenario with the NFL draft coming up later this week if you're watching as of the date this video gets released. This man right here is UTEP quarterback Gavin Hardison, and no one really knows where he's going to get drafted. There are some places that have him as an undrafted free agent, and some places that have him going in the 6th or the 7th round. He's not going to be one of the top quarterbacks off the board, but he is going to likely get a call from some team, whether it's as a draft pick or as an undrafted free agent. Now, I want you to imagine that Hardison decides that he doesn't really want to play football. He's got a postgraduate career lined up. He's not returning anyone's calls or responding to any teams inquiring about him. And he's flat out saying, I'm probably done with this sport. It was fun in college, but football just isn't a viable long-term career. And I have to start thinking about the future. Unless I get drafted in the 3rd round or higher, I'm just going to hang up the cleats for good. And even if I do get drafted, I've got a lot to think about. You'd be really freaking stupid to draft the man in the 3rd round if he said that, wouldn't you? You'd be really stupid to hear that, hear about his heart not really being in it, hear about how he doesn't really want to play football, and think to yourself, that's a guy I want on my team. And keep in mind, he's not bluffing, and he's not doing this just with your team, a la Bo Jackson with the Buccaneers or Eli Manning with the Chargers. He's doing this with everyone. Well, I bring that up because at the 1978 NFL Draft, that's exactly what happened with this man right here, Penn State running back Steve Geise, after he got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals actually made some pretty solid picks in 1978, all things considered. They got Ross Browner, a cornerstone on the defensive line for them for close to a decade, and a man who ended his Bengal career with 61.5 sacks, which to this day is 5th all-time in franchise history. They got Tom Dinkel, a linebacker who played 102 games with the team, which is not too shabby for a 5th-round pick. They got Blair Bush, a very good center who started 161 games over his NFL career and played an incredible 17 seasons in the league. And they got wide receiver Don Bass, who was, statistically speaking, a top 15 wide receiver in 1979 and was a favorite target of quarterback Ken Anderson. But they also made some bizarre picks that left you scratching your head. And taking this man that you've been watching, Steve Geise, was definitely one of them. Because in 1978, the Bengals made a choice that not only they didn't seem too interested in making, but that the player in question didn't seem too thrilled about, making this quite possibly the most apathetic pick in NFL history. And nearly a half-century later, this is the story behind one of the most questionable draft picks, considering the circumstances, in the near 60-year history of the Cincinnati Bengals franchise. Before I talk about the pick in question and what exactly made it strange, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, Steve Geise, was, and how good of a player he was while at Penn State. During the 1977 season, the Penn State Nittany Lions had one of their best seasons ever. They finished 11-1 with a Fiesta Bowl win, and they ended the year ranked number 5 in the AP poll. Penn State did this thanks to its top 15 offense and points scored. And the man who led the Nittany Lions in yards from scrimmage during that 1977 campaign? None other than Steve Geise, who had 739 yards total, forming a great 1-2 punch in the backfield with him and eventual 2nd-round pick of the Chicago Bears, Matt Suhey. Over Geise's collegiate career, he had 1,362 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns, posting fairly similar stats from a rushing standpoint in both 1976 and 1977. Was he anything special or spectacular? Not by any means, but he was definitely solid, and his versatility as a blocker, as a pass catcher who could run routes even beyond the line of scrimmage, and as a runner, made him a key part of Penn State's offense throughout the mid-70s. And with that in mind, the Cincinnati Bengals decided, with pick number 155 in the 6th round, to take Steve Geise and make him the newest member of their team. It was somewhat of a bizarre pick from the start, seeing as the Bengals seemed more than fine at running back. They just drafted a man out of San Diego State in round 2 by the name of Deacon Turner, and they had a crowded backfield as it was, even excluding Turner, with Boobie Clark, just a few years removed from having over 1,300 yards from scrimmage, Lenville Elliott, who averaged over 4 yards a carry and had over 500 yards from scrimmage in 1977, Pete Johnson, the team's second-round pick from 1977, who would eventually become a Pro Bowler and one of the best backs in the league, and Archie Griffin, the first-round pick they made out of Ohio State back in 1976. As a side note, to learn more about Archie Griffin, click the card in the upper right corner. I'm not really sure where Geise fit into the mix in that already crowded backfield, but if that was all we were dealing with here, then this is a complete non-story. However, it's what Geise said upon getting drafted that raised some eyebrows and made a questionable pick even more questionable. Because upon getting drafted, I think Bengal fans who were paying attention were collectively wondering, wait, why the heck did we just draft this guy? Because it seemed at the very least like Steve Geise had no intentions of playing football. Said Geise, I was really surprised to go that high. I had made up my mind that if I went in the later rounds, I wasn't going to play. It was a big decision for me, because football is a short-term proposition, while a job is a long-term thing. In other words, the man didn't view football as a job and as a viable way to make a living, while also saying that he was shocked to go that high, and that if he didn't go that high, that he wasn't going to play, and was going to move on to the next chapter of his life. So, wait a second, time out. Let's think about that for a second. You said that if you went in the later rounds, that you weren't going to play, and you weren't going to continue your football career. Yet you also said that you were surprised to go that high. If we piece 2 and 2 together, that sure sounds like you had no intention of ever playing again. If you were surprised that you got picked that high, but you were only going to play if you got picked that high, then it makes it seem like you were definitely leaning toward not playing and entering the quote-unquote real world in 1978, and that your mind wasn't in it. Especially because after getting drafted, you even flat out said that football was a short-term thing and was not as beneficial going forward as a real job. Let's think about it like this. Let's say that I say, straight up, I have no intentions of ever moving out of the United States, because it's more beneficial for me to stay here, and I'm preparing for a future here. However, if someone gives me $100,000 right now, I'll move to the Netherlands, but I highly doubt that anyone will give me $100,000. Sure enough, someone gives me $100,000 to move to the Netherlands. It sure sounds like you were never expecting to make this move, nor do you really want to make this move, but you kinda have to out of obligation, even though it came completely out of left field. If I say, I have no intentions of doing X event, and I don't expect Y event to happen, but I'm not doing X unless Y happens, it sounds like you really don't want to do that. And then, as if this draft pick couldn't get any more bizarre and confusing, Geise said on playing for the Bengals, I didn't expect to be picked by Cincinnati. When they sent out letters during my junior year, I don't think I replied to them, and I didn't have any feelers from them this year. They didn't talk to me. For those wondering what the heck a letter is, this comes courtesy of Bengal Jim's BTR, a great Twitter account for all things Bengals history, and it looks something like this. Before you had the NFL Combine, and before you had an entire department of scouts going all over the country, you had these questionnaires that you would fill out and send to teams, where you'd put your information in. Obviously, it's very easy to fake the information on here, and this card was from 1968, not 1978, so it looked a bit different. I find it fascinating how there's an entire section about your draft status for the Vietnam War, and that part was definitely not on the questionnaire sent to Geise, but Geise just didn't respond. This man right here showed no interest in playing professional football, and he showed no interest in playing for the Bengals, and it seemed like the Bengals got the hint and didn't even bother wasting their energy and talking to him entering the 1978 NFL Draft. And no, you don't have to talk to a prospect beforehand. There are plenty of guys who get drafted that never had a single conversation with the team. But when you consider everything else at play, this is rather strange. The Bengals sent out a feeler a year ago. Geise never responded. Geise said that he probably was not going to play pro football barring anything crazy, and the Bengals decided to make something crazy happen, seemingly against Geise's wishes based on the comments he made. And you might be saying, well, wait a second, we're talking about a 6th round pick here. There are plenty of teams that take flyers on guys that might not ever play in the NFL or be that good. And true, that was a thing. There were plenty of teams back then that took a shot in the dark on a player and hoped for the best. They take a guy off of pure athleticism and talent, even if they had never played football before or hadn't played since high school. And they figured that they had nothing to lose. The amount of basketball players taken back then was staggeringly high. However, that was in the absolute latest rounds of the draft. We were talking about what happens when you get to picks in the 300s and even the 400s if we're talking the early 70s. This was not the case with 6th round picks. Remember, Steve Geise was picked number 155. Today, that's a 5th round pick. That's not nothing. You were still expected to get value out of a draft pick like that back then. Heck, in the 1978 NFL draft, as in the same draft that Geise got taken in, there were many guys that contributed that were chosen in round 6. The Miami Dolphins drafted all-pro defensive end Doug Betters, who ended his career with 64.5 sacks. The New York Jets drafted defensive back Bobby Jackson, who started 90 games for the team and was starting for the Jets all the way until 1985, recording 21 interceptions and being a critical part of their secondary. And this was the same round that Dwight Hicks got drafted in, as in the 4-time Pro Bowl safety who was one of the top safeties of the early 1980s and played a key part in helping the San Francisco 49ers win Super Bowl 16 during that 1981 season, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And the year before, in 1977, the 6th round produced a ton of great players, including Philadelphia Eagles running back Wilbur Montgomery, who had over 9,000 yards from scrimmage and made 2 Pro Bowls, Dallas Cowboys offensive tackle Jim Cooper, who started 99 games for the team and was starting on the offensive line as late as 1986, tight end Emory Moorhead, who started on the Chicago Bears when they won Super Bowl 20, and defensive lineman Joe Klecko, who is considered by some to be the greatest defender in Jets history, and who is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Plus, 75% of the players drafted in the 6th round that year played a game in the NFL, and over 70% of the guys, 20 out of 28, played at least 10 games. I'm not saying you expect a 6th round pick to be a world beater or anything like that, but you're not throwing darts at the board by this point and hoping for the best. You're not using it on a guy like Steve Geise, who has no interest in playing football, who has no interest in you, and who you don't even seem to care all that much about, seeing as you never inquired about the man after he was a senior. This just seemed like a really bizarre pick from the onset. Who benefited from this? And at least with athletes like that, these are guys that have high athletic potential. Drafting a track star in the 11th round that's never played football before? Yeah, he might decide to never sign with you guys, and you might have just burned your pick. But if he does sign, and you just got a man who can run a 4.2 40 and can burn past cornerbacks and safeties with ease a la Bob Hayes, you just got yourself a stud. The risk-reward is off the charts. You waste one of your bajillion picks back then, most guys in those rounds weren't making the roster, and if it does work out, you got a steal. But aside from the fact that you didn't do this in the 6th round, especially on a guy that seems to make it very clear that he's not interested in playing football and seems to be putting those days behind him, it's not as though Geise was playing all that well in college. He was solid, don't get me wrong, but you would think for a guy of his size that he wouldn't be so easy to bring down. His second-level speed wasn't great. He was averaging under 4 yards a carry during his final season with the Nittany Lions, which obviously isn't everything, but it's still notable and well below what other running backs who got drafted were averaging. This isn't like drafting a basketball player or an Olympic athlete where the ceiling is super high. Geise's ceiling, as it was was awfully low. Now combine that with the fact that you're spending a 6th-round pick on the man has seemed to have his mind made up about not thinking about a career in football, the man has ignored you, and you never bothered to follow up, and nothing about this pick seems to make any sense. You might as well have just thrown your draft card into a fire pit. At least that would give you some warmth for a couple of minutes. At least that would give you something. Geise said that since the Bengals drafted him and drafted him awfully early, that he was going to give it a shot and see what happened. But that shot was awfully short-lived. He never played a single down in the NFL, getting cut after training camp in 1978, making him the earliest draft pick that the Bengals had that year to never play in professional football. Again, Geise viewed football as a short-term thing and not a long-term career, which is statistically and objectively speaking, the smart way to look at it. But you could tell just based on how he was talking that he had no shot at making it. Nor did I ever think he wanted to make it. Said Geise after getting drafted, "I know it will be hard to make the team with all the good running backs they have, but I have to go try it, get it out of my system." No one that gets drafted talks like that, where they say, "I had no real desire to play, and I never expected to be in this spot, but I've just got to get it out of my system just so I can say that I had no regrets." So when you combine everything, it really is no surprise that this didn't work out for anyone involved. Now, I will say this much about Steve Geise. After getting drafted and cut by this team behind me right here, the Cincinnati Bengals in 1978, he went back to school and studied to become a physician, graduating from Pennsylvania College in 1985. And to this day, he still practices. Nearly 40 years later, he is still going strong and is still practicing. And from what I can tell, he practices in Arizona, so who knows? Next time I need a physician, I know who to call. The man clearly had a plan and knew what he was doing. I'm not criticizing him in the slightest bit. Steve Geise definitely had a great plan after football, and it's worked wonders for him. But it doesn't make the situation that happened in 1978 any less strange or bizarre. So as a word to the wise for any teams and general managers drafting players, if you're watching this video for some reason, make sure the guy actually wants to play football before spending high draft capital on him. If the guy speaks like he just wants to retire, give up the sport, and move on to a post-football career, then that's probably a sign. If the guy is straight up telling you, "I'm not going to play unless something crazy and unforeseen happens," then that's probably a sign. If the guy isn't responding to your messages because he doesn't really want to play football or views it as a real possibility, then that's probably a sign. And if the guy is talking about football the same way you talk about a stomach bug, saying that you never really wanted it but you just have to get it out of your system, then that's probably a sign. Because when it came to the Cincinnati Bengals and Penn State running back Steve Geise in 1978, the selection of Geise was not so nice. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.